I think infertility treatment, obviously when you start out, everyone's hoping for success, but it doesn't always come. And I think it can be helpful for couples, maybe with the help of the docs they're working with, to, at the very beginning, think through the overall scope of what they want out of this, and should there be a boundary. I think it makes sense at the front end to kind of flesh out how long this is going to go on if it doesn't work. I mean, obviously you hope it works right away. And you can kind of map out pretty easily for couples the kinds of things that seem to be appropriate for them in terms of treatment options. But having some kind of a boundary around it is I think, useful for everybody at the front end. So that if it doesn't happen, they kind of recognize that they gave it their best, and maybe it just wasn't going to happen for them, and they can move on to other parts of their life. I think when couples are trying to figure out whether they should press on with further therapy, the therapy they've had so far hasn't worked, there's a couple of things that I think are important to put on the table. One is maybe their emotional ability to withstand further treatment. Sometimes there are sorts of treatment that they think will be too physically demanding or too emotionally demanding, and really should say, if that's what we have to do, maybe that's not for us. I also think that most people don't have infertility treatment coverage, so I would hate for couples to sort of drain their bank and mortgage their house, and just to keep going and going when if it doesn't work, they may find themselves in a very vulnerable place financially. So I think that has to be faced and factored into the decision. I think also there can be some types of treatments that couples find morally unacceptable for themselves, so kind of focusing on that. Well, we tried IVF with our own eggs, and that's not working, and it's not likely to. Is donor eggs a good option for us? It's a good option in terms of success rate, but if it is morally contrary to what they really believe is appropriate, then they probably shouldn't do it. So there's a variety of factors: financial, emotional, physical, and ethical, I think, need to be put on the table. I think adoption as one of the options to build your family is sort of always on the table. When I sit down with couples, once we know what they're up against, that's always on my list. And it's always, in a way, the most effective option, right? Because for couples who focus on adoption these days, it almost always gets them the child. And I think that's a good option. I think it's always a good option. So I always kind of talk about it as one of the things to consider from the beginning. But again, a lot of couples wouldn't do that initially. Adoption is a tough process as well as the infertility treatment. There's family studies and long waits, and depending on how you do it, there can be the birth mother may at the last minute, renege and decide to raise the child herself. So it's got its own hazards, but it's a very effective way of family building. I think it serves an important need for a lot of couples, and is more readily available than people think. That's the other piece of this that kind of comes and goes over the years, but domestic adoption is now more common than people think and more available than they think. Child-free living is not the place the couples that we meet with want to be, to start with. But in reality, there are a lot of couples who don't have children, and they do fine. There are other ways of being happy as a couple, and in fact, I think couples sometimes who don't have the little kids to raise for 15, 20 years have a more appreciation for each other, and they experience some things in life that folks with kids never get a chance to. I mean, I would have to acknowledge that if you don't get the child that you want through infertility care, there's a grieving process, because it isn't where people intended or hoped to be. but at the same time, it's not a bad place. There can be a lot of life in the child-free existence.